Before words, before writing, before borders, there was punching. No one had to explain it, everyone just understood. Some fought for food, some for pride, and some because, well, someone looked at them wrong. Over time, punching became a sport, then a spectacle, then an obsession. 3000 BC, Mesopotamia, Egypt, Greece. People were already fighting, and now they had an audience. Ancient Egyptian tombs literally have paintings of guys throwing hands while spectators placed bets. Yes, before stock markets and casinos, gambling meant wagering a goat on who could take a punch better. Then came the Greeks, 688 BC. The Olympics introduced pygmæia, which sounds like a fine wine, but really means who can beat the other guy senseless first. There were no weight classes, no rounds, no referees. Just two guys punching until one of them couldn't stand anymore. You could literally be getting pummeled to near death, and the audience would just be like, give it a minute. Fighters wrapped their hands in leather straps, primitive hand wraps that eventually evolved into boxing gloves, but at this stage, it was bare-knuckle, bone-breaking brutality. And in case you're wondering how bad it got, one Greek champion, Cleomedes of Topuria, literally punched a man so hard, he died on the spot. The judges disqualified him, so he stormed off, ripped a pillar out of a school, and killed 60 kids. The Greeks responded by declaring him a demigod. First major rule of boxing, if you die, you lose. Unless you're Cleomedes, then you just get promoted. Then Rome showed up and, as usual, said, let's make this way more violent. Greek boxing was brutal, sure, but the Romans looked at it and thought, not enough blood. So they introduced the cestus, a glove lined with iron, lead, and sometimes spikes. Imagine getting hit by that. Now imagine getting hit by that for hours because there were no weight classes, no time limits, just a fight to the pain or to the death. By the 1st century BC, these fights became so savage that they were no longer just for sport, they were entertainment for the masses. The Colosseum turned boxing into a deathmatch spectacle, where gladiators fought for survival in front of 50,000 screaming fans. And if you lost, well, you didn't go home, because there was no home to go back to. But when the Roman Empire collapsed, so did the sport. People had bigger problems, like starving, disease, and getting raided by barbarians every Tuesday. Boxing, forgotten, for now. By the 1600s, boxing was back, but this time, it was like a bar fight with an audience. There were zero rules, zero gloves, and absolutely zero concern for anyone's well-being. Fights popped up everywhere. Taverns, alleyways, the occasional royal court when someone spilled a drink on a nobleman. And the betting? Absolutely unhinged. People weren't just gambling money, they were wagering houses, businesses, and in some cases, their own wives. Imagine losing a fight and having to go home like, babe, I made a mistake. The fights themselves, utter madness. There were no weight classes, meaning a 200-pound blacksmith could be thrown into the ring with a skinny guy who looked like he delivered milk for a living. Eye gouging, allowed. Biting, go for it. You could even grab someone's hair and punch them repeatedly in the face. If you think Tyson biting Holyfield's ear was wild, just know that some of these guys would sharpen their fingernails before fights. Then, in 1743, a fighter named Jack Broughton watched his own friend die in the ring and had the world's most delayed, maybe this is bad, moment. He introduced the first boxing rules, banning hitting a downed opponent and giving fighters 30 seconds to stand up before the fight resumed. Did people respect these rules? Absolutely not. Then, in 1867, rich people decided to civilize the sport, creating the Marquess of Queensberry rules. Gloves, 3-minute rounds, actual referees. Suddenly, boxing wasn't just a London alleyway brawl. It was an actual sport. But let's be honest, some people still missed all the chaos. By the early 1900s, boxing was looking less like a sport and more like a human demolition derby. There were no proper weight classes, so some fights were just a death sentence in shorts. Imagine being a 5'6" accountant with dreams of stepping into the ring against a 6'4" bricklayer who trains by punching actual trees. That was boxing. Finally, in 1909, weight classes were standardized. It wasn't a perfect system, but at least they stopped throwing flyweights into the meat grinder. Then came Jack Johnson. If you think modern athletes are controversial, this guy made entire governments lose sleep. In 1908, he became the first black heavyweight champion, and the world exploded. This man didn't just win. He laughed, dodged punches effortlessly, and taunted his opponents while fighting. White America couldn't handle it. They dragged James Jeffries, an out-of-shape retired farmer, back into the ring in 1910 and called him the Great White Hope. Jeffries lasted 15 rounds before getting annihilated, and within hours, riots broke out in 25 states. People were literally shooting each other in the streets because a black man had won a boxing match. The U.S. government panicked and found a way to arrest him. Johnson fled the country, fought overseas, and became the most wanted man in America for punching people too well. Fast forward to 1938, and boxing was now a proxy war. Nazi Germany propped up Max Schmeling as their symbol of Aryan dominance. The U.S. threw in Joe Louis, a soft-spoken knockout artist who didn't do too much talking, just breaking jaws. The White House called Louis personally before the fight. "You're fighting for America. No pressure, right?" The fight lasted 2 minutes. Schmeling landed 2 punches before getting obliterated and had to be carried out on a stretcher. Hitler never spoke of him again. By the 1960s, boxing got a new face, Muhammad Ali. And Ali, this man was the internet before the internet existed. He roasted opponents like a Twitter thread gone viral. He called Sonny Liston a big ugly bear, told Floyd Patterson he was too slow to chase a bus, and told George Foreman he hit like an old woman swatting flies. But Ali wasn't just entertainment. In 1967, the Vietnam draft happened, and he said hell no. The government stripped him of his title, banned him from boxing, and he still stood his ground. By 1971, he was back, and Joe Frazier was waiting for him. The fight of the century was so brutal that Ali, for the first time, was humbled. Frazier dropped him in round 15, and for 5 years, Ali pretended it never happened. But Ali didn't stay down. In 1974, he took on George Foreman in the Rumble in the Jungle. Foreman was knocking people out like they owed him money. Ali knew he couldn't trade punches, so he invented rope-a-dope, leaning on the ropes, letting Foreman punch himself into exhaustion, and then boom, Ali dropped him, and the stadium erupted. But the real war, Thriller in Manila, 1975, Ali versus Frazier, Part 3. 14 rounds of pure hell. Both men were half dead. Ali begged his trainer to cut his gloves off, but before that could happen, Frazier's corner threw in the towel. Ali said later, "That was the closest thing to dying I've ever known." Boxing wasn't a sport, it was a battlefield. By the 1980s, boxing was pure violence in a suit and tie. The skill was still there, but the real question was, how fast could you destroy the guy in front of you? If you weren't knocking people out in record time, you were just background noise. Sugar Ray Leonard, a man so fast he could probably slap you twice before you blinked, was running the show. His fights with Roberto Duran and Marvin Hagler weren't just about belts. They were wars. In 1980, Duran beat Leonard in a brutal 15-round brawl, only for Leonard to come back months later and break him mentally. In their rematch, Duran literally quit mid-fight saying, "No mas, no more," and walking away like he had somewhere better to be. Then came 1985, when Marvin Hagler fought Tommy Hearns in what looked like two guys trying to commit a live crime scene. That fight barely lasted 8 minutes, but those 8 minutes were nothing but punches thrown at full force. By the time it was over, Hagler's face was leaking, but he was still standing, and Hearns wasn't. Then, in 1986, boxing got its new king, Mike Tyson, a 20-year-old kid from Brooklyn, walked into the ring and started ending careers before they even began. His first 19 fights, all knockouts. 12 of those knockouts, first round. Some of those guys barely lasted a minute. If you were late to a Tyson fight, you just wasted your money. The man wasn't here to entertain. He was here to eliminate. By 1988, Tyson had held all 3 major heavyweight titles and had officially become the most terrifying man alive. Nobody wanted to fight him, but if you had to, you made sure your will was in order. Then, in 1990, the impossible happened. Buster Douglas, a guy who had 42-1 odds against him, stepped into the ring with Tyson. His mother had passed away weeks before, and he told everyone he'd win the fight for her. Tyson knocked him down in the 8th round, but Douglas got back up like he had just been respawned in a video game. In the 10th round, Douglas landed a 4-punch combo so clean it belonged in a training video. Tyson went down. The referee counted to 10. Mike Tyson was knocked out. Nobody moved, nobody cheered. The world just stood there stunned. But the wildest part of Tyson's career, 1997, Evander Holyfield. Holyfield had already beaten Tyson once. The rematch was tense, rough, and full of headbutts. Tyson got frustrated. He leaned in and bit Holyfield's ear clean off. Not a nibble, a full bite. Blood everywhere. Holyfield jumping around, referee stopping the fight, and Tyson standing there like he had just had a mid-fight snack. Meanwhile, in another weight class, Prince Nassim Hamed was making entrances so ridiculous they belonged in WWE. The man rode a flying carpet into the ring. He dodged punches like he was in the Matrix. He knocked people out with a single swing. By the end of the 90s, boxing wasn't just about skill. It was absolute madness. Tyson was in and out of jail, Holyfield was missing body parts, and the sport was raking in millions per fight. This wasn't strategy. This was war. By the 2000s, boxing had a problem. The sport was still making money, but the chaos, the drama, the insanity that made people glued to their screens in the Tyson era, it was fading. Then came Floyd Mayweather, a man so good at avoiding punches he could probably dodge taxes better than billionaires. He didn't just win, he never lost. The man retired at 50-0, untouched, unbroken, and with a bank account bigger than the GDP of some small nations. His biggest fight, 2015, Mayweather versus Manny Pacquiao. The hype was insane. People called it the fight of the century. Celebrities, billionaires, entire countries tuned in. It made over $400 million in pay-per-view sales alone. Then the fight actually happened, and it was meh. Mayweather did what he's always done. Dodged, countered, and played it safe. It wasn't a war. It was a masterclass in not getting hit. He won, made hundreds of millions of dollars, and the audience, some felt scammed. Meanwhile, something else was happening. A new rival to boxing was creeping up, UFC. Faster fights, more violence, and a younger fan base. People started asking, is MMA going to kill boxing? But then 2018 happened. A YouTuber, KSI, challenges Logan Paul to a boxing match. Yes, two guys whose job it was to make clickbait videos suddenly decided to box. And people watched. Millions of people watched. Boxing purists hated it. This isn't real boxing, they screamed. But the numbers didn't lie. More people were now talking about boxing than they had in years. The sport wasn't dead, it just needed new chaos. Boxing in the 2020s has felt less like a sport and more like a reality show with uppercuts. Every time you think you've seen it all, something even more mind-bending happens. Tyson Fury and Deontay Wilder spent years trying to punch each other into another dimension. Their trilogy, a full-contact soap opera. The final fight in 2021, Fury takes Wilder's best shots, gets dropped twice, then rises up like The Undertaker and knocks him out in the 11th round. Heavyweight boxing hadn't felt that chaotic in decades. Then, as if the simulation glitched, Jake Paul started actually winning fights. The YouTuber turned boxer went from viral pranks to knocking out pro fighters. And in 2024, he did something that made the entire world spit out their drinks. He defeated Mike Tyson. Sure, Tyson was 58, but it still makes Josh the sixth person in history to beat the former heavyweight king. Somewhere, a boxing historian probably had a heart attack. Meanwhile, the light heavyweight division got flipped upside down when Dimitri Bivol walked into the ring against Canelo Alvarez in 2022 and did what very few believed possible, beat him. Canelo had been untouchable, but Bivol outclassed him, proving that sometimes the underdog actually bites. And speaking of finally happening, after years of build-up, Tyson Fury versus Alexander Usyk became reality in 2024. Two of the smartest heavyweights in history battling for undisputed greatness. After 12 rounds of high-level chess with fists, Usyk won by split decision. The heavyweight crown belonged to Ukraine. But the madness didn't stop in the ring. Bare-knuckle boxing made a comeback, as in actual no-glove old-school, hope-you-like-facial reconstruction surgery brawling. Turns out, some people still prefer their fights as raw as a medieval tavern beatdown. Boxing is like that one friend who refuses to leave the party. Just when you think it's done, it comes back swinging. From ancient fistfights to million-dollar spectacles, from gladiators to influencers, it refuses to fade. Rules change, faces change, but the chaos stays the same. As long as people have hands, they'll use them, and that's why boxing will never die.